Hey, you're going to be okay. I'm Elizabeth May, and my functional health practice, Hey Hey MAE, helps people heal when they've exhausted traditional options. When no one can figure out your health challenges, my team helps you resolve symptoms and restores your health. You're listening to my podcast, where we'll hear stories of healing chronic illness from a root cause, immune-centered approach. Today, we're tackling a topic that's becoming increasingly common in our practice. It's something we've seen for several years, but we're seeing a big rise of it across our chronic illness world in America. MCAS, or Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, and histamine issues. If you've ever felt like your body suddenly started reacting to foods, but maybe not always the same ones, maybe supplement reactions, smell sensitivities, different medication responses, or you know that you've had environmental exposures to things like mold, or you've struggled with Lyme, or even just big immune responses to stress itself, this episode is totally for you. We are going to tackle MCAS, understanding it, understanding mast cells, understanding more of what histamine is doing, and its good friend POTS. So while we're talking about MCAS specifically, I kind of want to walk through it in terms of immune dysregulation. And one of our lead practitioners, Krista, and I are going to chit chat through this because she sees so many of our mold clients, which is a big place where histamine reactivity, sensitivity, MCAS will show up. And we really want to talk through how this is a bigger conversation than how do I just lower the histamine or how do I stop the histamine response. We want to know, why is the immune system behaving this way in the first place? So let's start at the top, Krista. What are mast cells? Let's just kind of break down the basics of what's going on in the body.
Yeah. So mast cells are a type of white blood cell. And while most white blood cells like to kind of hang out and circulate within the blood and travel to sites where there's infection, mast cells, they instead reside in the tissues, especially the areas of the tissues that interface with the outside world. So that could be like skin, sinuses, airways, lungs, digestive tract, bladder. They can hang out around the nerves, the blood vessels, connective tissue, and ligaments. And they're kind of the soldiers that are responding to, they're kind of patrolling. They're like the sentinels or alarm systems that are watching the environment. And then they're deciding how to coordinate an immune response, which usually involves, first, degranulation, which the mast cells will break open and start to spill their contents, which have, different mast cell chemicals such as histamine, which is the one that we hear about the most. But there's other cytokines, prostaglandins, of course, tryptase, and all sorts of other things that can be released as well. And they also create kind of vasodilation to allow other immune cells to come in. So they're really, really intelligent and really helpful when they're behaving and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is really orchestrating and delegating this immune response.
Yeah, so it's really like histamine isn't necessarily the bad guy. He's a part of the whole system that's showing up. And I always like to explain mast cells, and of course I teach children a lot, we all do, but mast cells are kind of like little confetti cannons. And until they're like shot off, they're kind of okay. They're just there to be ready for a party. But when the party starts, they really start to send out a lot of their products, which one of those being histamine. And they really are in those protective places, like you said, places between us and the outside world. So they're definitely a part of immune defense. It's when they get aggressive that it's an issue. And I kind of want to break down too, vasodilation, because that's a big word that's like a what? That really just means that your blood vessels are being dilated. So there's more space. It's like a highway. We're making the highway a little bigger so more immune cells can get into the place that the immune cells need to be going. And mast cells, if we go back to our kind of usual teaching on Th1 and Th2, which there are plenty of episodes on that, they're part of that Th2 arm of the immune system. And they can do they can release, like you said, cytokines. And so cytokines can also they are inflammatory promoters, interleukin 13, 9, some of those guys. IL is another abbreviation for that people may be familiar with, but these trigger more mast cells. It's all communication amongst the immune system. And so once you get a mast cell started, sometimes mast cells aren't happy to calm down. So that brings us kind of like to MCAS. So what is MCAS?
So MCAS stands for Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. So this is when we're looking at these mast cells, and they're kind of just degranulating whenever they want. And so that can be temperature changes is a big one. It can be infections. It can be, which we kind of want them to respond to infections, but we don't want them to be over responding. They can respond to, pollen, mold, mycotoxins. Stress is a huge one as well. They can respond to foods that they shouldn't be responding to. And they can respond to so many different things that it becomes really difficult to really understand what's happening, because there's so many other systems that get impacted. We talked about the vasodilation just a little bit, so we'll go back into that. Mm-hmm. That you can end up with so many different symptoms. So they can impact the skin as well. So you can get hives and itching and flushing and redness. You can also, they impact the digestive system. And then you'll get a lot of, nausea and vomiting. And if there's blood sugar swings, you could have histamine being produced within the stomach too. And that can also, when mast cells are dumping histamine, and also on its own. And then you can end up with more symptoms there as well. Mast cell degranulation could look like things like reflux. We might even see kind of food restrictions or pickiness in kids around what's going on with the immune system throughout those tissues. Certainly respiratory system, which people are probably aware of that, just sort of, shortness of breath, chest tightness, but kind of for no reason, where we're going, gosh, why all of a sudden is this happening? I'm not exercising. I don't feel like I'm reactive to the environment, but maybe I just had a little bit of a stressful event, or I haven't eaten in a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm like having shortness of breath and I'm coughing up phlegm, things like that. We can also see it, of course, in the cardiovascular system too. So we get a lot of people that come to us with complaints of heart palpitations or tachycardia, or that racing heart, dizziness, blood pressure changes. We can see it. Their mast cells are in the brain too, so they can also affect, things like brain fog. You'll also get headaches, insomnia, pain responses too, which when we get into, if we talk about POTS and even a little bit of cervical instability and connective tissue issues, we can get a lot of the body trying to kind of brace and compensate for a lot of the inflammatory processes that are going on throughout the cervical spine too. So it can just be all over the place.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the cervical spine, and even some hypermobility stuff can cross over. And that is something when I think through clarity calls, which is our first step in working with people, is people who are struggling with MCAS will say, like, I feel like my body is reacting to everything, whether that's smells or stress or random foods. That's totally there. We also see people who feel like they have 8, 10, 12 foods. These are the only things I can eat without a major response. And that's one thing. Then we do see like the mood swings and like the psych presentation a lot of times in kids, like we're good, everything's fine. And then we've absolutely lost our marbles and are doing all sorts of bizarre things, or focused on everything from being super anxious to suicidal, just like kind of all over the place. And that's really a lot of the language that starts mast cell involvement. But since we work with a lot of Lyme and mold, the hypermobility piece is huge. The upper cervical, or they'll say a lot of times, like, as long as I see a chiropractor who does atlas adjustments, which is super upper cervical, I'm okay, or that really helps me. Those are all clues for me. And that's really because that histamine is interacting with our joint spaces and just making us more hypermobile. But I do want to talk more about that piece, because I think that's huge. And so often Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I don't want to say it's popular, because we see clients who absolutely have genetic markers and more than just symptom load, but we also see people who self-diagnose, which is, I don't know, I feel like it's fine. You can self-diagnose MCAS a lot of times in POTS before you can get any kind of useful something. But like, what is it? What's going on there? Why are we often seeing people who have histamine issues feeling like, oh, I'm super hypermobile, or I feel like I've got Ehlers-Danlos? It's not just that, right? Like, it's not just the Ehlers-Danlos possibility.
Yeah. Well, and mast cells release, of course, different inflammatory chemicals. So this, again, the cytokines, again, histamine, prostaglandins, and any of these mediators can contribute to the vasodilation and that sort of, we have blood pooling down below. And so then we have kinds of dizziness, and that's kind of more into like the POTS and some of those dysautonomias. But when there's inflammation around the cervical spine, you can end up feeling like you have kind of like a bobblehead. And so you don't have these structures really being supported the way that they should, and it can trigger some other, processes and other dysautonomias alongside of it. And so you can have, and for some people, that's like the first sign for like going into a mast cell flare. All of a sudden their neck starts hurting because things are becoming wonky throughout here. Other systems start to stabilize the neck. And then they're going, okay, then the bloating happens. And then the POTS-like symptoms where we have some of the blood pooling down below and we don't have proper constriction because of that vasodilation. You get back up to the heart, back up to the brain. So then the heart's racing. And so that can sometimes be the first clue for some people. Oh man, there's so much pain. And then we can think about things like, well, what infections are hanging out in those areas too that could be triggering these mast cells, like EBV that hangs out near the occiput, or Bartonella, things like that, Lyme. So certainly lots to explore when it continues to keep happening in certain parts of the body too.
Yeah, it's really interesting as I think too, back to my own like acute tick bite, just to kind of give like a little window into like, what does this look like? Can it just show up or can it build over time? Yes, both. But a lot of times it does kind of become a lot more acute. And several years ago, I was bitten by a tick and I contracted alpha-gal syndrome at the same time, which is a very serious food allergy to the alpha-gal sugar molecule, which is found in mammal meat. So basically you become acutely allergically responsive to any mammal meat or mammal product. So that would mean dairy, that would mean meat, cheese, glycerin derived from it. So lots of different places. And I would take my pork-based thyroid medicine in the morning, which is a teeny tiniest little pill. And I would very quickly have like the whole right side of my body would be burning. My gallbladder would be very, very painful. I would have lots of nausea and just icky feels. My chest would get tight. It would be hard to breathe. I would feel faint. Sometimes I would feel like I was going to pass out, or if I leaned backwards, then I didn't have enough blood flow and I would get very woozy. It was very bizarre, but all that was going on, that's a little bit, alpha-gal is kind of odd, but not so much anymore. All that's going on is my immune system was reacting. Mast cells were getting involved. And then I was having this, you can see it was like multiple body systems at one time. But the part that was interesting for me physically, because we'd absolutely seen clients with this over the years, but like, I could feel a response start to happen. Like my posture would kind of slouch. I would kind of move into like a shrimp shape, and my neck would start to hurt and it would feel like my head was sliding down my spine. There would become a lot of instability there and just a lot of inflammation basically. And it was just the most bizarre thing. But as I continued to heal and those episodes got further and further apart, that was always my sign. Like I would feel very loosey-goosey, even my knees and my hips. I would just kind of feel like I kind of had to be really conscious about holding myself together. And then like you said, you end up, sometimes we see clients where they have a lot of body pain on one side or the other, one hip and one shoulder. There's compensation. And so it's not necessarily you have muscle pain as your main symptom and major soreness, but it's because of the allergy immune mast cell activation situation that made you a little hypermobile or made you a little loosey-goosey in your spine. And then you've got muscles compensating. So you can start to see how MCAS affects all these systems. And then also it's a whole heck of a lot of chain reaction. But I think what I'm really hearing you say and that we see is that when it comes down to it, mast cells are immune cells. And that degranulation is like when they decide to start exploding, basically, and they're sending out those mediators. Instead of mast cells responding appropriately, they're just overreacting. And one of a good analogy is like, it's a smoke detector. Mast cells, like immune cells, are there to drive around and look for threats or intruders. But when they start going off all the time, like if your smoke detector goes off every time you make toast, there's not a fire, but it thinks there is. So it's still doing its job, but it's the detector part isn't broken. It's just overly reactive and overly sensitive. And that's when we move into that like more MCAS, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. So can you kind of help us to differentiate between like histamine intolerance and then like an MCAS presentation? Because all these words, as they grow in popularity after COVID immune stuff, are being used interchangeably. Like, are they the same thing? Does it matter what we call it?
Yeah. So histamine is both a chemical and it's also a neurotransmitter. So it can be produced in the brain and then it's also produced by the mast cells and then the basophils. So it's also produced by our immune system. And it can come in endogenously through foods. There's certain genetic factors that can certainly reduce the ability to break down histamine. We all hear about the MTHFR genetic mutations, and there's a couple of others that we can look at too as well to think about histamine breakdown and DAO enzymes and things like that. But so we have it coming in from food, and then we also have to think about the body's ability, for whatever reason it is, to be able to break it down and eliminate the excess histamine. And then there are people that really just are very intolerant to there being excess levels of or just histamine in the body I wouldn't even say it has to be necessarily in excess, but just kind of circulating through the body because of other factors. We know that pathogens also produce histamine. So parasites and fungal overgrowth will produce histamine too. And so we kind of have to look again. We've brought this up, in other podcast episodes, but that bucket scenario and that histamine is coming from multiple places. So you look at MCAS, we're looking at, the immune system and mast cells degranulating and responding to things appropriately or not. And then we think of just this, kind of intolerance to histamine. A lot of times there's both. There almost always is. If there's mast cell issues, there's going to be histamine issues. And I feel like they really do, exist alongside each other, kind of depending on what's going on. Like in my mold people, like I almost see them both all the time. If we're just dealing with like an overgrowth of bacteria or parasites and something's moving through the system, or maybe there's genetic pieces to it, sometimes it can be an issue and then it can kind of clean up right away and not be an issue anymore. So these might be those people that go on vacation and they get some weird parasite. And then every time they drink red wine, they're flushing and their heart's racing. We take care of the parasite. All of a sudden they don't have histamine issues and they can drink red wine again. That's like an easy example. And then there's some people where it is something where they're having to kind of watch and be careful about the histamine intake, getting rid of pathogens that are contributing to that bucket overflowing, and then also addressing the mast cell piece, which means addressing the infections, the immune system, and the nervous system too, all together, and the environment. So lots of work to do and be done around that.
Quick break. If you've been curious about homeopathy, this is your sign to try it. At Hey Hey Homeopathics, we've created liquid remedies for everything from sleep and skin to digestion and beyond. Safe, gentle, and designed for real life. And if you're a practitioner, our preferred professionals line opens the door to powerful tools like no-sodes, miasms, detoxers, and more. Anyone can shop, but professionals can apply for exclusive access. Visit heyheyhomeopathics.com and start your path to natural healing today. Lots of work to do, and I also think it's free because I genetically don't clear histamine very well. And then also in seasons, like you can have Lyme, you can be living in mold, and that puts a lot of strain on the kidneys. And so they're responsible for some DAO production. DAO breaks down histamine. So in those seasons when I've lived in mold or when I had acute Lyme, my DAO production was not sufficient to keep up with things. And then also if you remove yourself from mold, that takes one thing off the table. So there's lots of different ways and angles to get to a healthier place, which I think is cool. And then also there's lots of ways and angles to either promote more histamine or not get at it enough. And so that part's interesting. But I hear you saying kind of histamine intolerance is more about the body's inability to clear it efficiently or quickly enough, whatever the reason. And then mast cell activation syndrome is about, yes, there's not good clearance of histamine, but those mast cells are really doing too much. They're oversensitive, and it's maybe more of a profound issue. And histamine intolerance is going to be present with MCAS, but really the MCAS piece adds the layer of like getting those cells doing all the crazy mediator release to really calm down. So we know mast cells are an overreactive immune system on that inflammatory side. So we want to think about, why does someone become reactive? And this is where our collective conversation with our clients always moves, because it's not just like, okay, you have MCAS. That's great. I always say I got an MCAS diagnosis during my Lyme season, and you know what it got me? Nothing. I already knew that I was having big histamine issues. And so we want to ask, like, why? why would someone have an immune system that's really reactive and developed MCAS?
Well, I'm always going to say mold exposure, chronic mold exposure. Oftentimes, a lot of us have been in it our entire lives and don't know if we're in it now. Why weren't we in it when we were children and growing up and all of that? So most people have been in it for a long time. Their immune systems have been doing something really weird for a long time. And then there's that one little domino piece that falls over or just, and everything starts to shift, which COVID is a big one. Lyme and co-infections can, they evade the immune system and they keep the immune system very confused for a very long time. And so we can also see MCAS, and I almost always see it in some degree of it. And again, I really think MCAS and the hypermobility piece and POTS go hand in hand. So I almost always see all three pieces for most of my Lyme people. There can be a significant stressor too, like a divorce or a death in the family. And all of a sudden that is what tips the immune system over. And then all of a sudden we have what we would, guess to be MCAS. So we can go into testing another time, and testing's not always very reliable. Looking at symptom presentation where there's multiple systems in the body that are affected gives us really good clues about whether or not this is a mast cell issue, especially in children, but adults too.
Yeah. So there's lots of different triggers, and really, I feel like you always do a good job talking about like early exposure. We see a lot of kids, but we also see adults who are like, oh, I have MCAS. Well, I had seasonal allergies. Well, I would always get like a little extra sick, or I would really have a hard time recovering. Or for me, I did grow up in a house the first few years of my life where there was significant mold, like a lovely old farmhouse. And it definitely had plenty of that. And my body is more sensitive, overreactive 35 years later. And so these mast cells, your whole immune system it functions, it's there to patrol and keep you safe, but it does have behavior patterns. And that's why the nervous system is involved too, because it directs a lot of that responding. And some cues for me when I'm doing calls are somebody who's like, I'm good till it's seasonal allergy time, then I absolutely like plummet and can't function. Okay, well, that's cool. You may be able to get through your seasonal allergies, but if you stack something else like a mold exposure or a tough round of COVID or Epstein-Barr stent or even the Lyme and co-infections, your body is going to probably be very quickly reactive, and we may be all the way to MCAS much more quickly. And it's really just more about that immune system being overreactive because it's kind of been conditioned through years of either early exposure or issues, but it's definitely not a random diagnosis, I would say. And I don't feel like people need a full MCAS diagnosis to be dealing with this. We see that all the time, that immune system is there to respond to threats. And like you said, stress is just as much a threat to my body's well-being as a tick bite is. Like, that sounds a little nuts, but it's really inflammatory. If you think about how you function and behave when you are stressed, like none of that's necessarily bad. It's just you're under a fight or flight situation all the time, whatever the stressor is, and that can promote those immune cells, which is interesting and maybe confusing or a new concept for listeners. Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about like the toxin exposure route of MCAS. Like, mold is one. Do we see other toxicities contributing for sensitive
and
people?
Just to add something to what you had said about the nervous system piece, because we all know that tick bites also affect the nervous system and can keep us in sympathetic overdrive. So if we have a nervous system that we feel is not doing us any favors, we got to look for infections too because of how they dysregulate the nervous system. So pathogens are always sending messages up to the brain, and a lot of people don't even feel themselves until they take care of it. And that could be decades, if not. Just being depressed and being overly anxious and having social anxiety and all the stuff that just starts to make mast cells degranulate. I would say that like EMF exposure is another big one for mast cell degranulation. Again, and so hiring, somebody to come into the home and kind of assess the EMF and the dirty electricity and putting in some affordable little pieces to kind of help yourself there can be really helpful for people. And then also fungal burden, Candida overgrowth does release tons and tons of histamine. So that can be the big piece too. Of course, toxins, anything that's coming into the body, backing up the liver, keeping the liver from being able to clear the histamine, from being able to clear hormones. So we know that like fluctuations during the cycle can also cause mast cell degranulation. So when hormones are just changing throughout the cycle, especially with MCAS people, they're extremely, extremely sensitive to any kind of hormonal change, especially in perimenopause. So we need that liver working well. We need toxins being able to clear. We know that we live in a toxic environment, and they're always our system's always dealing with them. So what are we doing to help toxins to be able to move through our system? Blood sugar dysregulation is another huge thing, and that's kind of the basic foundation I feel like that we need to be looking at with every single person, and our clients need to be taken seriously too, because you can have so much healing that can take place if you stabilize your blood sugar and you don't have all those blood sugar swings, because that will cause mast cells to degranulate and release the histamine and other inflammatory chemicals and mediators. So that would be a big thing. Any kind of gut dysfunction too. So again, like parasites and other, bacteria, pathogenic bacteria within the gut too, that's releasing inflammatory cytokines and just kind of keeping the immune system always engaged.
Yeah, I think that's really important, kind of just talking through the blood sugar piece too, because really mast cells kind of respond when there's a threat, and blood sugar is still a threat to like how you feel and how you function right now. So if my blood sugar drops, my body's like, oh, we got to get this blood sugar up so this girl can stay upright and keep functioning and be able to do her stuff. But that is still like a threat to my day-to-day well-being. Even the GI stuff, when people have like a parasitic infection or just bacterial overgrowth, sometimes we'll see mast cell response after their stooling. And so what happened there? Like you went to the bathroom and now you're having kind of a mast cell episode. Well, your body literally was clearing or moving that pathogen load, and your immune system, nervous system, which is there detecting for threats, says, oh, there is parasites in the poop, and the poop just moves. Like we need the inflammatory response. So there's a lot of maybe we think of as bizarre things that can trigger mast cell responses or even just histamine response. But really it all goes back to the body is under some sort of a threat, whether it's infection related or toxin exposure, mold exposure. Maybe hormone change is the only one that's not quite a threat. We see that sometimes with our clients who've dealt with infections in the past, and they'll surface and say, I feel like I'm a little potsy or a little bit MCAS stuff going on. Not like it used to be, but are my infections back? Not typically. It's usually your proclivity towards an MCAS kind of overreactivity. That hormone flux comes in and we kind of have a little bit of a new season. You're just very familiar with what POTS and MCAS feels like because you've already experienced it at its worst. And I think it's important too, you were talking about that nervous system piece. So much of the internet chatter is about, we just rewire the nervous system and your POTS will go away. Just rewire the nervous system and your MCAS will go away. What are your thoughts on that part?
Well, danger is any change for an MCAS person. So it's kind of like the temperature just changed outside. It's now hot. And I mean, anything could be, even like wind blowing on people's faces, and then it kind of activates the trigeminal nerve. And yet people will start to flare as well. So any kind of change to the body can cause a flare. And so that's something. And so doing work around the nervous system and getting your body to be in a place where it feels safe is really important. We talked about the chronic infections piece to that too, of how chronic infections affect the nervous system. And I can say that because we see it so often where we address EBV or we address Bartonella and people are like their issues just go away. What happened in a few months is more than they've been able to make shift in 10 to 20 years of therapy. So we're going to say that. But there's a lot of programs that are out there. What I don't, and I've had my MCAS people say, this has been helpful. It's been really helpful. What I don't like is that we're ending up on a computer having to look and work through the program, and you learn certain things, but I would love for people to spend a little bit more time finding ways to just disconnect and be in their body and get the tools you need from those programs and put them into place, and then get off and unplug. Because the blue light exposure, the EMF exposure, all of that is also going to be, we're not used to it. Our bodies aren't used to it. Our cells are not used to it. For those of us with lots of adverse childhood events, we can't have all this input all of the time. And so I just would wish for people to get all the skills they can around the nervous system, and then stop looking, stop searching, implement the skills, and figure out what's going on with infections and the immune system too.
Yeah, we kind of lovingly joke sometimes that with clients, like, how do we get this one to stop the search? Because they're in care. We see what's going on. We've walked through data and said, here's where it is. This is what's happening. And now we're going to get your body to calm down. But if you keep searching all the time for the new answer, the new problem, the whatever, without implementing the change for a period of time, which we always ask for, like, can we just have, sometimes we try to ask for 4 months. Sometimes we'll narrow it down because the body that's under threat, you feel like, I can't give you 4 months, lady. We'll say, okay, let's just do 2 months and let's work through the process and really try to calm down. But what you're saying is so true, because even when I had alpha gal, I mean, I know a lot of this stuff. And so it was a little easier for me to be like, okay, what I need to do is, now that I've done addressing the infections and I'm doing the auricular needling and my physical body is starting to deal with the mammal meats better, I'm doing okay with that. I have to do the work of telling myself every time I go to eat them that, like, I'm safe. I'm safe. My body's stronger. It can handle this. And it's like simple stuff like that rewires your nervous system. And a lot of times I always joke with our team, kind of like, you have to show up with the confidence for the client until they can take it as their own. And we're encouraging them to take it as their own all the way through, because you can heal. Your nervous system can relax, but your belief system is so important. And that's one place where MCAS kind of makes me bummed, because a lot of communication online is like, here's how to manage your MCAS. This is where you'll be the rest of your life. And we're just like, no, absolutely not. There are reasons that it's there. So we work on those reasons. We remove those danger pieces. We teach you how to really self-soothe, whether that's around, for me, like, it's okay to eat this beef. It's no longer reactive. Or my house is clean from mold. Let's look at the data. We know that it's clean. And developing a belief system, like, that's really all nervous system work is the belief systems that drive our brain and our nerves communication. That part, I think, is what is also magical for your clients, because you do a really good job of walking them through a lot of those emotional pieces and being really diligent and persistent at pushing them to get to that place, because it's so important. And I think, even just to piggyback on one other thing, the EMF piece, sometimes people feel like, what? That is not an issue. Oh my goodness. I have been so surprised, even in the last few years, how much of an issue it is, because it really, the dirty electricity piece can drive mast cell response entirely. We have a client who has dirty electricity from a factory that's like dumping onto their property and home, and their little girls have big mast cell issues, and that's literally all that's going on. And so thinking about people living in cities with more exposure, I don't want anybody to think of EMFs as like a danger, but really they are like a little bit of a danger trigger to your body, and they can start flares too. So I love what you said, that danger is any change for an MCAS person.
It's changing. So I always have people kind of keep a calendar for a little bit to, like, get to know their body, because you'll start to notice patterns in your flares. Like, I flare during the week, but not the weekend. I can eat this during the week, but I can't eat it. Or I can't eat this during the week, but I can eat it on the weekend. And so there's that nervous system piece too that's spilling over your bucket. And I'll put MCAS into a bucket. It's got its own bucket, and histamine has its bucket. So you start to really learn about your body. When are you having flares throughout your cycle? And so things like that, and just really what your triggers are. So, I mean, that's really important. And once you start to develop that pattern and that awareness, then we get to come in and, like, kind of get out all of the confusion and the mess and really help you get to another place of healing. But that awareness of what's happening is really important too, because people come in and that's what made me think about it, was the food piece. They're like, oh, I can't eat this, or I can't eat this. Is that true? Or is it, what else is going on during that time? So
yeah, it's never just one factor, even though we can in our very well-meaning, just trying to function through life, kind of think like, oh, it's just this one part. If I can get this part better, then like, but it's layered. It's multiple things for sure. Let's talk about the genetic piece, because this is another area people ask about constantly. And I think we've been taught and conditioned by our traditional system that like, oh, if I got this and my mom had it, then I just got it from her. But some people feel like they have MCAS because their parents had a histamine issue or allergy issues. Like my dad always had to get allergy shots. Probably why I have this. Is that true? Is there any validity to this thinking about MCAS being like a genetic thing? We touched on MTHFR, but can you like expand on some of that for us?
So again, we have other genetic SNPs that it can influence the I'm going to call the excretion of histamine or clearing of histamine. But I think, MCAS is more, yes, I do. When I think about our clients, we do see it throughout the parents, the allergies, the grandparents. It is kind of moving through the lineage, but I think that trauma moves through the lineage too. Right. And then also the mold mycotoxin exposure. Your parents were in the same environment that you were in when you were growing up too. And they most likely, I know that my family certainly all lived in horrible amounts of mold, and chronic infections are also moving through the family too. So if child has Lyme, most likely mom and grandma might have it also. And so, I think about those kinds of pieces as more of kind of, we're inheriting a lot from our family, besides just the genetic susceptibility too. And so there's a lot to that whole piece. And then, testing genetics can be something to do as well, just to kind of see how you can optimize and how you can really help your body be able to clear toxins, because some people have certain genetic SNPs where they can't clear chemical exposures very well, and they can't clear toxins very well. And, SNPs besides the MTHFR, I can't talk, MTHFR. So those are things to kind of look into, things that can fill your bucket from a genetic standpoint as well. So.
If you've been wanting to transform your health but don't know where to start, I've got you. My full color cookbook is much more than recipes. It's a 300-page crash course in healing through food. You'll get 125 plus gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free meals the whole family will love, plus step-by-step guides on shopping smarter, improving digestion, and making your kitchen a healing place. It's gorgeous, practical, and designed to make healthy living simple. Grab your copy at heyheymae.com/cookbook and start changing your health one delicious bite at a time. I think that's important too, to talk about this inflammatory response. That's inherited. And I love to talk about it in terms of emotions, because emotions tend to last like 90 seconds, right? Like as a physiological process. The story you tell yourself keeps you activated past the 90 seconds, whether you're mad past that or sad or super scared or whatever it may be. If you really sit down and think about it, and kind of next time you have a big emotional response, like check yourself in 5 minutes. Like, do I still feel really physically feeling that feeling? Or is it like what's going on in my brain that's responding? And sometimes I just think about clients who are like, get really stressed about any and everything. Well, did you learn that from somewhere? Like, do your parents function that way? These things are still inflammatory producers, right? Like they're feelings, but they are inflammatory responses, and it's kind of a different category. But that is one piece. And then, like you said, MTHFR, HNMT is one that I see a lot. And we don't tend to pull genetics right off the bat. When it comes to MCAS, we want to figure out why it's there, help you get comfortable, get you to a place where that's calmed down. But sometimes in some of our kids who have cross issues, like for me, ADHD or autism, some of that stuff I'll be pulling genetics for to learn about some pieces, and I'll find like, oh, this person's genes code them to not break down histamine as well or produce DAO as well. But ultimately, genetics just create susceptibility, not inevitability. Just because a gene is there and coding for function doesn't mean that the poor function is happening. That's the whole beauty of epigenetics. Sometimes a gene really turns on, like a celiac person who has celiac genes but still eats gluten fine. That may be more about they haven't had an event that has triggered that gene to express in the unhelpful way. So for me, it's not a be all end all, but it's also not the genetic piece. I don't think is the place where we just check out and say, oh, because my dad had allergy shots and was super allergy reactive, I'm just going to be this way forever. There's more to that for sure. So important chat, but let's talk about the MCAS and POTS situation, because you can't really talk about MCAS without talking about POTS. So will you tell us, like, just a quickie on what it is again, and what's going on there when it's interacting with MCAS or showing up together?
And you just made me think about the COMT gene too, because then
Oh, yeah.
you can't clear all the stress hormones.
Yeah.
You can't clear the stress hormones. You're not, that liver, it's not clearing histamine, and then you can have more mast cell degranulation too. So that's the one I don't like to see. And when I see it, I slow down COMT. I do, yeah. I do different protocols with people. I work with them differently. There's a lot more nervous system stuff that's put into. I think about hormones differently when I see that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's helpful sometimes to know that, but we also don't always get to know the gene parts, and people still get better, which is important too to think about.
Yeah. So POTS, again, when we see MCAS and we see it releasing its mediators, we can also think about POTS too, because POTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And we know that histamine creates vasodilation. So you can have blood pooling down to the lower extremities. You can have it pooling down into the gut. And then people are going, gosh, I have all this bloating that's all the time. And I'm also dizzy. And the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system should kick in until, and start to actually create vasoconstriction to get that blood kind of pumping back up to the heart. And if there is kind of deeper layers of dysautonomia, sometimes that does not happen. And so people can end up with blood pooling and they're still dizzy and their heart rate slows. And so that's probably another conversation, but it can look like a lot of really scary stuff. So people come to us with a lot of symptoms all over the place, and they've been to all these different cardiologists, and they are telling them we can,
do a heart monitor.
A heart monitor. You can go on beta blockers, drink a ton of electrolytes, which can be a really good thing to do. And then they make them feel, they feel like they're crazy. No, but I just did this and I didn't do this and this happened. And then, they do end up feeling crazy. So it's all connected. And most of the time, a lot of the time, we just see all those little pieces happening all at once. Just more, for some people, it's could be a little bit more of the pot stuff. For some people, it could be a little bit more of the hypermobility stuff. They just really kind of go hand. I can't even say that it's more on either end. Again, genetics and other things kind of fit into that picture, but lots of stuff is going on, and that's what we know. And so we get to investigate, take your symptoms, and really put together the full picture with the, having seen hundreds of people with the same issue. So, it's a lot.
It's the same kind of pattern that, like, when one system becomes dysregulated, the others kind of cascade and follow. And so traditional medicine is going to be like, oh, you need to go to the cardiologist because you got this cardio stuff. And you need to go to rheumatology because you got some weird immune stuff. And you need to go to GI because you're having diarrhea every time this happens. And that seems weird. And then also you probably should visit endocrine because your hormones or your adrenals or that sort of stuff is off. But really it's about one system is becoming dysregulated and it interacts with the other systems. And then we see that symptom presentation. The other thing about POTS is you kind of talked about going to the doctor and getting the runaround. Not that the runaround is intentional, but I want to say that if you feel that you have POTS and you passed a tilt table test, you can absolutely still have POTS. When I had my alpha-gal syndrome, I'd lived in mold like 8 years prior to that and had a lot of MCAS stuff. And I never experienced the POTS until the alpha-gal tick bite. And what was going on, that immune system portion of the anaphylactic type response to the mammal meat was so huge that pushed me further into more of a POTS presentation. I had more tachycardia. I had a lot more blood pressure fluctuations. I had the really low heart rate and then really high heart rate. All of those things were playing together, and I passed the tilt table test. I also, when taking the test, didn't want to lean all the way back because I knew I was going to pass out, and I enjoyed that. So, there's more to it, and traditional medicine is recognizing it now. We can at least have a conversation and say, I feel like I have POTS, and they know what you're talking about. But this is definitely one area where, there's not a lot of tools and there's not a lot of help or identification because it's it's not relatively new, but it's definitely increased quite a bit with COVID. And so approaching MCAS and POTS is different. But I want to walk through, like, how do we approach MCAS? This is where people are often like surprised by our approach, because yes, we do want you to feel better. We want symptom relief as quickly as possible, but symptom relief is not the whole thing. We want symptoms to be relieved for the long haul. We don't want to just toss antihistamines at you and teach you how to manage your mast cells. We want to ask, like, why are your cells so reactive? Why are we in this super intense degranulation phase where you weren't there before? We want to find a longer standing solution. So talk to us kind of about how we address it.
Well, first we're calming the fire. So I want to get like a really good idea of what's going on. And so again, that calendar piece, not everyone wants to do it. Not everyone even does it, but I am keeping notes of everything that the clients have going on throughout their month. Like I know when everyone's cycles are, it's kind of funny. So I'm keeping a really good notes on kind of when is this flaring happening? What is happening? What infections can be a part of this picture? And we are looking for chronic infections because this is sort of a condition or syndrome where like no stone left unturned. I want to know what infections your body has seen, whether it's, Borrelia, Bartonella, Epstein-Barr virus, COVID was that where the shift took place? What kind of mast cell supports do we need to bring in? How does your body respond to them? Also can give information. We walk clients through this immune training process to kind of bring that intelligence back to the immune system so it's not overreacting and doing things that it shouldn't do. I do work with, again, like the environmental triggers piece, looking at what's in, especially when it comes to mold and mycotoxins, because that can be such a huge instigator, and other infections that are coming in for like POTS, what we just were talking about, that can go away. But it can come back if that's where that person is susceptible, if an infection's coming in. So we are really kind of going through, I'm going through the health history, figuring out what this body has seen. We're looking at adverse childhood events too, to kind of see what's going on with the nervous system, and then putting together a really nice plan to kind of clear out all the muddy water and also get an idea of where this person is triggered the most. And I feel like I could go on and on about that, because we could go into how we use homeopathy to address that and the emotional piece too, but maybe for another podcast.
Yeah, and so that calm the fire piece, I feel like, is more calming the histamine mast cell fire is maybe the one place where traditional medicine like throws some tools in there that can be helpful. Like they'll use antihistamines for both H1 and H2. They'll use mast cell stabilizers, but ultimately those are Band-Aids. They also kind of actually interrupt a helpful immune process. We should be able to inflame, have a little mast cell action for like to deal with an actual threat, like a real actual, like if I get bit by a tick today, I would like for my immune system to show up, eat it up, deal with it, and then resolve. And those medications come in and they thwart the process. They don't help the body resolve an immune cycle. And so that's one way that that helps. Or even I've seen functional folks, or even just it's usually nurse practitioners in offices that have dug and tried to figure out things for their people, who have brought in DA, or they brought in different herbs that can be, antihistamines. Those things will be there, but past calming the fire, we have to really ask, why is it happening? And then get the immune system to rebalance, where we don't have that Th2 dominance, where the mast cells aren't being recruited for every single last threat, where your body's able to have more discernment between, is this an emotional response that Elizabeth's body's having right now and that feels like a threat? Or is it she walked into a room of Stachybotrys mold and we actually need to show up and clear this out? Because if that immune system is screaming, we want to know, why is it screaming, and is it really screaming for a reason? Do we need to kind of level it out? I think something else we see sometimes with traditional medicine world trying to calm the fires, maybe they'll notice like, okay, this happened after you had shingles. You've got mast cell stuff going on. And so they're like, okay, we'll bring an antiviral because that'll address the infection. Or this all started in your kid after they had strep. And we know that strep can create MCAS type presentation is going to create a lot of histamine. That is a neurotransmitter, so it can kind of make a lot of this behavioral stuff. Okay, doctor says, let's just do some more antibiotics. That's going to help us get rid of the strep. Then we'll get rid of the MCAS. But it doesn't help long term. And that's really where our process is different, because antibiotics are just killing. The work that we do is to modulate the immune system in a permanent way. So it knows to address, like, attack the strep when it comes in. Don't just overproduce mast cells and over flood the body with histamine. Actually kill the problem. Stop overreacting to it. And that part is what gives you that longevity. And even with my alpha-gal stuff, in that season, to turn off that mast cell activation, I did have to pull out any mammalian meat, anything, dairy, all that stuff. I did use DAO, but then we had to address the Lyme and co-infections that came in my body with that alpha-gal bite, rewire the nervous system through that auricular needling process. And I tell myself, like, I'm safe now. It's okay. I can eat meat. Like, that is over. And my mast cells calm down. My immune system learned to eat the Lyme up instead of overreacting. And then you get that longevity where years later, I'm still eating mammal meat. It's great. And I'm still using glycerin on my skin and not getting rashes like I was. I can deal with temperature outside. I'm not passing out. I don't feel like I get overheated. Those sort of things are not happening anymore for me because the immune system rebalancing part that we do, it gets our clients longevity of health. And that really is the most important issue. So one of the most important things I want listeners to walk away with is that MCAS isn't just a histamine problem. It's a clue or a signal to other stuff. You've talked a lot about how mold is often in there. Mold's a hot button ticket conversation. Mold's in a lot of houses that we live in. But really, it can be a trigger. And MCAS can be the signal to say, like, hey, Elizabeth's body's in mold. We're struggling. So we're making all these mast cells and having all this degranulation. It's evidence that the immune system is stuck in a really defensive posture. And our job is to figure it out. And I think, too, just thinking about our clients who struggle with MCAS, it's a really stressful thing. And then stress promotes it. So you're kind of like stuck in this hamster wheel. And being able to have somebody like you come in and say, let me ask you the questions. Let me put your symptoms on this calendar and start to kind of track what's going on. Let me ask key questions to help us figure out what's activating the immune system, is such a gift and a grace to that person. Like, I know our team helped me when I first had my bite and we were just piecing together what was going on. And to have that assistance when you're dealing with MCAS is so powerful, because stressors are triggers. It can escalate the MCAS response, and it does feel like a little bit of a hamster wheel. So I think that part's important. What else do you have?
Oh, I just keep thinking of mold while we're trying to heal the immune system. Like, get the environment clean. We can teach you how to be in mold and get relief. Mm-hmm. But it's so much easier when that's not a part of the picture. So, yeah, because these infections, they like an environment where the immune system's not doing what it should be doing too. And then we know that Lyme does its own stuff. So, yeah, it's really, with MCAS, you can just feel totally crazy, and people will really look at you like you're crazy. What do we do with you? There's so many different things. And so, I just like for people to know that they're not crazy. All of these things are actually happening, and let us figure it out for you, because we understand. We've been there. So it's like, it is, and you absolutely can feel better too. So, and yeah, there's just so many little pieces to look at. We didn't even talk about the thyroid. So another time, but yeah, so this is like one of my most passionate subjects. So
I think that mold piece is really good, and you do a great job with our clients. And we all see people with mold, but we'll often tag Krista in because she's just super great at understanding or helping them strategize really quickly about, when you figure out you've got mold, it is such a big process, right? Because you've got to get it inspected. You've got to get it remediated. We need to make sure it's, cleared and not in the environment. And And those 3 sentences just made that whole process very small. But sometimes people can't do that right away, but they still need to feel better. They still need to be more functional. They still need to get to a place where they can at least go to their job and make income and eat and do things like that. And there are so many things that you do to teach them how to live with mold, or that we do to teach them how to calm the immune system, even when the threat is there as we're working on it, that gets people really big gains. And my goodness, when I had my bite, I was so thankful that our team had those tools, because I was able to keep going. I could still take care of my kids. I could be awake all day long, which is tough when you have a lot of histamine. You get very tired. Those parts are really important. And I think we often meet an MCAS client at a really tired and exhausted place, because physically the histamine does make you tired, but also to be tanked like that most days, your adrenals, your cortisol response is part of it. And you can just really feel like hopeless, depressed, like without energy reserves. And those parts are very real, especially if you've gone to the doctor and you passed a tilt table test and your heart monitor looked great. Everything looks fine. Your blood panel looks fine. There can still be other panels that we need to look at, other things we need to think about. And that classic POTS MCAS signature, you and our team do a really good job of identifying it, figuring out why it's there, getting quick tools in the picture, and then getting the immune system resolved. Which is something that is unique. And I haven't found a lot of other places in our traditional world for sure, offer that to folks. So I'm glad we had this chat today, because MCAS isn't usually the root cause. I think it's starting to get a little bit of a, reputation for like, oh, you just have MCAS. That's what's going on. That's the root of everything. Nope. MCAS is really just the immune system's alarm bell. It's sending out big, debilitating symptoms to you daily that it is having problems. And we don't want to silence those symptoms. We want to figure out why, so that we can turn the alarm off, so it's not activating all the time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for chatting with us and sharing. I appreciate it. I know so many people are going to love this, because we get asked all the time, can you talk more about it, by clients who have lived through it and feel better and see it in other people. So I'm excited for this episode, just to give people hope and a path out of a hard place. So thanks for spending time with me today.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. I hope you're leaving encouraged, curious, and hopeful. If you learned something, I'd love for you to share this episode with a friend. Hey, we are all healing together. You can learn more about my practice, our team, and what it's like to work with us at heyheymae.com. I teach lots on Instagram and answer questions there each Monday. My Instagram handle is at HeyHeyElizabethMae. You can watch these podcast episodes and more on our YouTube channel, Hey Hey MAE. Learn about and enjoy our homeopathic line, and take our homeopathic short course at heyheyhomeopathics.com. Happy healing!